You know, normally we get Mark Lackey in here, Executive Director of CHF Capital Markets, to talk about metals, you know, iron, gold, all those kinds of things. But he wants to do agricultural today. He's got some interesting ones: potash, canola, and agricultural production.
That's right.
Read tomatoes into that.
And you know, Pat, originally, over the years, I tended to do probably just phosphate and potash prices. And one of my old colleagues, Roy Darcy, who was over at Berg-Invest Bix, said, you know, you follow the whole agriculture market in order to do that, so why not diversify and give us some other agricultural ideas? And so, you know, you start digging around, you find that there's a lot of other small players in the agricultural market with some very interesting plays. And as we mentioned before, Pat, everybody concentrates on the MOP market in potash.
MOP and not SOP.
SOP, that's right, the SOP market with sulfate of potash. Now that's only 10% of the market, but as it turns out, it's the market that's really growing. And it wasn't affected at all by the Russian-Belarusian situation, which affected, of course, the MOP market quite significantly.
But MOP, and the difference is chloride, isn't it?
Exactly, Pat, that's exactly the issue. So while you can grow a number of crops with MOP, fruits, vegetables, tea, you cannot use MOP because of the chloride. They have to be relatively salt-free. So it's a market that's been growing quite quickly. I mean, I didn't recognize till recently China is the biggest producer of fruits and vegetables in the world. Sure. You've got a large citrus market that's growing in Brazil. Of course, the tea market in India we've all known about, but that's improved dramatically by using SOP as opposed to using no fertilizers. So this market's really growing for SOP, and it's a great opportunity because, as I said, it's fairly unique in its characteristics.
Okay. Now, the company you're looking at is Potash Ridge, correct?
That's right. That's right. So once I found I liked SOP, the only problem I had was trying to find somebody that produced it. The big guys have some, but there's no leverage. So I looked around and I found Potash Ridge, and what I liked about it was a few things. Number one, I liked the jurisdiction. Utah, very good for mining and agriculture. Good infrastructure, very good management team. And then at the end of the day, Pat, it was also, after they've done the 43-101, appears to be a potential low-cost producer. So I think that when you add up all the aspects here, Potash Ridge clearly came to the top of my list as an SOP player. And yes, the stock price has moved off its lows from last year, but it's still, I think, a great opportunity for people to get involved.
Well, interesting concept. Okay, we want to go from there to canola.
Right.
And I'm being told by my wife, canola is what we should use all the time. I like olive oil.
She's absolutely right, Pat. Olive oil is not bad, Pat, but canola has no taste. It is also...
That's why I don't like it.
It's also very low in saturated fats. In fact, the FDA and the Heart Association of the United States are now recommending canola over every single other oil, that it's better for you. And because it's also, you can burn it at a high temperature so it won't smoke. It's got an awful lot going for it. Also the fact it's one of our major cash crops here in Canada. So to play canola, though, I had to look around to come up with an idea, and I found a company called Input Capital. And they don't produce the canola, but they're in the streaming game or the royalty game. So they come to farmers and say, fine, we'll give you the money, but you give us a certain amount of your production over a certain number of years at a certain price. It's along the lines of what we saw with Eric Sprott and Silver Wheaton and people in the gold and silver aspects. So I think this is kind of a brilliant idea.
Franco was the one who started it, really, in the gold mining sector.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You and I go back that far.
Well, that's right, Pat. So interestingly enough, that's worked extremely well in the mining sector. And I thought, gee, here's somebody, and these guys have been doing this for a year, and they've seen some pretty rapid growth. And I like it because it actually offers an alternative to the banks. There's nothing wrong with the banks, but at least farmers who want to look at a different way to capitalize maybe all or part of their production now can go to Input Capital and work a deal. And the other thing, people said to me, well, aren't you a little bit worried about the rail system? And I said, well, you know, a lot of that's being worked through quite well. In fact, the backup in the agricultural sector is being cleared out pretty well right now. There had been some backup, Pat, given all the oil that's being shipped, of course, along the rails. But we're seeing that the canola shipments are getting out there. So I think these guys are going to have a phenomenal next number of years. And stock price hasn't moved all that much recently.
What do they do with canola, the leftover, the meal? You know, as opposed to the oil that they extract.
I guess the meal can be used for all kinds of other aspects as well. I guess, as you say, they split it into two, and some of that meal would obviously be used for livestock feed and so forth. So yeah, nothing is left unused in the canola market.
Okay, so now we're moving into agricultural production. This is where the tomatoes come in, right?
Right, that's right.
And tell me why.
Well, here's interesting. I mean, I mentioned the other day that I really like this company, Green Star, and one of my colleagues said tomato paste. That's exciting. Well, except that the tomato paste price has actually gone up 40% in the last couple of years.
Really? Why?
Well, one reason, Pat, is
We're
that...
shutting down in Leamington, Ontario. It doesn't
Well,
make...
yeah, I can't kind of speak to that. I guess that was partly more juice, but why they wouldn't have converted it to paste is another question.
Yeah.
But of course, California, with its drought conditions, has seen somewhat lower production of tomatoes. They are very water intensive. So we expect that's going to continue this year. So yeah, there's a very good market for tomato paste, and these guys have actually, with their takeovers, are now going to produce 3 to 4 times as much paste in the next couple of years. So we have a company, Pat, here trading at 2.5 times earnings with an 8% yield. And it's surprising to me that more people haven't found this story, but again, it is on the venture, and it's not typical of the venture because maybe 1% of the venture stocks make money and have cash flow and dividends. So I think it's a story we're getting out to people, and as more and more people start to see this, I think, and people have said to me, if I can see another quarter or two of really good earnings, then I'll recognize this is a real thing.
You bring up an interesting point. Both Green Star and Input Capital, the canola company, are on the venture, as
Correct.
opposed to Potash Ridge, which is on the big
board.
TSX.
That's
Does
right.
the TSX give a higher level of credibility or international investment?
Well, I think that when you deal outside of Canada, I mean, I remember dealing with Buffalo brokers, and they'd say, you know, the guys in our office aren't as keen about buying venture stocks as they are. And I'd say, well, guys, the venture still has a pretty good reputation in terms of the levels you're at, because Americans might compare it to the pink sheets. Well, that's a completely different market. So I think you're right. There is some of that. And obviously, I think all these companies that are on the venture who, as they grow over time, will probably try to move themselves to the Toronto market. But I would say, Pat, for a lot of individuals, that's not something I pay as much attention to, because if you've got a good company, you've got a good company. And you're still going to get a number of people in Canada who will buy on the venture, especially when they see an opportunity like this.
Okay. Well, we've got some interesting ideas, Mark. Great to have you.
Good to see you, Pat.
Mark Lackey.